Living safely in his bunker, Joe watches and commentates a football game. His dog, Gilligan, has to go pee and starts to whimper. Joe checks the security camera to make sure the coast is clear before taking Gilly out. Joe looks at the sunset and states, "You know, Gilligan, some things are still nice, huh?" A montage is shown of Joe's everyday routines such as lifting weights, doing Sudokus, and watching football. One night, Joe takes Gilly outside as usual to pee and walkers start to approach. Joe puts up a trap that surrounds him and Gilly with rakes and other sharp tools to stop the walkers from getting to them. However, one of the walkers manages to get through without Joe noticing. Gilly jumps on the walker to save his owner, but ends up being devoured in the process. Joe kills the walker, but it is too late. He cries at the loss of his best friend. He buries Gilly near the bunker. Now all alone, Joe becomes very depressed. He no longer enjoys the activities he used to like. One day, he starts angrily throwing books, no longer finding any enjoyment in them. However, he finds a box full of messages he and a user named Ushulbskird had sent to each other before the outbreak. Both of them were preppers who had been getting ready for the end of the world. Joe reads through the messages until he gets to the part where she talks about meeting with him in person. Joe had been hesitant before the outbreak, but now curses himself for being a coward. He packs his stuff and sets out on a journey on his motorcycle to find her. In the middle of the night, while Joe is driving, his tires are popped by some spikes. He walks away and suddenly springs a booby trap that catches him in a net. The person who had set the trap, Evie, approaches the net and kills a walker about to bite Joe. She forces him to cuff himself before freeing him. She then takes Joe captive in her house and explains her situation. She plans on stealing his bike, though she does tell him of some benefits he'll get in exchange. However, she is unable to drive it since Joe has a kill switch, so she forces him to drive her to her destination. Joe remains uncooperative despite Evie's attempts to be friendly. She gifts him a necklace to wear, which she puts on him. They hop on his bike and drive off, with Evie holding Joe at gunpoint. On the road, Joe and Evie still don't trust each other. When Joe stops to go pee, Evie forces him to put on handcuffs. When Joe returns to continue driving, he puts on headphones and plays music, so he doesn't have to hear Evie. He starts to sing along with the song and Evie attempts to join in. However, one glare from him gets her to stop. Eventually, they stop for the night. Evie starts going through Joe's bag to see who he really is. When she grabs his journal, he becomes angered and tells her to stop. Evie starts reading Joe's messages with Sandra. Evie apologizes for prying into Joe's business and reveals she's also looking for someone. Joe doesn't answer and instead lies down to get some rest. Evie puts a blanket on him to keep him warm. The next day, to go on the road again. Evie looks at the sunset sky in amazement, something Joe once did, and says how there's still magic in the world. Joe initially answers in a very cynical manner, but soon apologizes and concedes that some things are still nice. That night, when the two stop to sleep again, walkers surround them. Joe asks for Evie to take off the cuffs since there are too many walkers to handle by herself. After some hesitation, she throws him a weapon, though he still remains handcuffed. The two fight the walkers and Evie demonstrates her martial arts skills. Now having formed a bond of trust, she gives Joe the keys to uncuff himself. The next day, he teaches her how to drive the motorcycle and they start to bond with each other. This time, the both of them happily sing along with the song together. The two stop for the night again, with Joe finding a drink. He asks Evie where exactly he's taking her and finds out their destinations are only 10 miles apart. He questions her optimism in the apocalypse, and she states that the apocalypse made her into who she is. Evie starts talking about her ex-husband Steven and her hopes of finding him. Joe then gives Evie his journal to see if she can figure out where the person he's looking for is. The next morning, Joe is starting up his bike when Evie calls for him. She reveals that she figured out where user Ushulbskird is. Joe is ecstatic over the news and laments about how this is the longest he has spent with another person in years. However, while they are talking, A man steals Joe's bike and leaves behind a lamb with a sign saying thanks for the bike. Joe grabs Evie's gun and aims at the thief. However, the gun is unloaded, allowing the man to get away. The two continue down the road. Now having to go on foot, Joe is saddened at the loss of his possessions. He blames Evie for their situation and the two begin to argue. He calls her mission to find Steven foolish and believes that he should have ditched her. However, she calls him out, saying that he had plenty of opportunities to get away. However, he didn't because deep down he's lonely and his world never got started, since he was always preparing for the end of the world. Not wanting to hear any more, Joe walks away from Evie and they go their separate ways. Joe manages to track down Ushulbskerd's location. He finds a security camera and yells for her to let him in. She opens the bunker doors and he jumps in, but accidentally hurts his leg. He limps down the hallway and goes downstairs, where he sees Ushulbskerd waiting for him. The two ecstatically greet each other, with her revealing her name to be Sandra. She aids Joe walk through the bunker and to the living room. Meanwhile, Evie finds her way to Steven's cabin. She enters and finds nothing but Steven's paintings. She looks through them and finds Steven had painted one of her, but one representing love rather than hate. Though disappointed she didn't find him, she is left satisfied, saying, "I hope you made it." Sandra offers Joe a brownie and he takes some bites. He talks about his experiences, including Gilligan's death. She tells him she's going to go freshen up. However, it's revealed that the brownie she had given him is drugged. His vision starts to worsen and he becomes delirious. Sandra puts on clown makeup and says she wishes she had met Joe before the outbreak, when he was still a good person. She ties his hands up and slashes the side of his neck with a knife, though he states that he's here for her. Sandra believes that Joe wants to take the bunker for himself and yells at him saying, "I don't believe you," before slashing his neck again, and beknownst to them, Evie is on her way. Sandra explains what had happened to her since the outbreak. She often had people knocking on her door but ignored them. However, one day a man broke in, wanting to take the bunker and kill her. She was forced to kill him, which caused her descent into madness. She goes to kill Joe, but her meat cleaver hits the necklace Evie had given him. Joe fights back, but Sandra subdues him. Right before she can finish him off, the alarms go off. Sandra checks her camera and sees Evie at the entrance. She accuses Joe of wanting to take the place for him and Evie before tying him up to a pole. She wipes the makeup off her face to give herself a presentable appearance. Sandra opens the door of the bunker and invites Evie in, putting on a very inviting and friendly persona. She gives her the drugged brownie, which Evie takes a small bite of. She asks about Joe and Sandra pretends not to have seen him, but Evie gets suspicious. She sits down and Sandra prepares to kill her. However, Evie calls her out on her lies and calls it shady to give someone a cannabis edible without asking. Sandra swings her cleaver at Evie, but she dodges and uses her fighting skills to overpower her. She hears Joe and runs to free him. Sandra charges at them, yelling maniacally. Joe throws the cleaver at her, hitting her in the chest and killing her. As Joe, Evie, and the lamb exit the bunker, a now reanimated Sandra walks towards them. They almost make it out, but Sandra grabs Evie's foot. Joe closes the door on Sandra's hand, causing her to lose her grip on Evie. He asks if she found Steven, and she replies that she didn't, but that's okay. Joe is still high from the brownie and starts bursting out laughing. The next morning, Evie wakes up cuddling the lamb and sees no sign of Joe. However, he then appears and walks over to her, much to her relief. He thanks her for coming back to save him and the two hug. He admits that she is right, that he wasted his life preparing for the end. Evie encourages him, telling him his life isn't over and he can start fresh with her and with a new outlook on life. Joe, Evie, and the lamb happily walk down the road on foot, with Joe giving the lamb a name, Skipper.